Okay, so in this video, we're actually going to make RestAPI calls against a large list. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and pick up where we left off, where in the last video, I believe we were doing the blocks. In this video, we're actually going to tackle the featured jobs. Now, the jobs are actually the core repository for all the elements within the site. So let's go ahead and switch over to our SharePoint site. Actually, let's switch back to a design. So in order to build the list to support the jobs or to host the job postings, I've went ahead and created that list, and I went through a couple of elements within the design to make sure that we had all the fields needed in order to account for a lot of different ways that we slice and dice the job postings. So for the featured jobs, there is a image, there's the job title, there's the position, location. I call this the summary. So there's the summary for that. And then obviously these do not need to be stored in the list. But when you go to the details of this job, that's when you get to see other fields that are needed. So we have the job description, and then over here we have salary, experience, so on and so forth. So let's pop over here to SharePoint, and this is my jobs list. Let's go and look at the actual schema. And for this schema here, you can see that I went through and created many site columns. And again, I create these at the site collection level because it gives me a lot of flexibility to reuse these columns. And a lot of these are reused columns from the blog and in the featured search by job category. I believe that was the name of it. But a lot of these site columns we've used before, and we keep the internal names the same. As you can see here, JP is active. We're prefixing everything with JP, and we're just changing the display name in order to make it relevant for every and each particular task. So this guy here is pretty much a standard list, but I just went through and populated a lot of these fields. And for options where I needed a choice or many different selections, but want to keep those finite or restricted, I'm using a choice column. We also using our trusty old publishingImage site column. Again, we're just reusing the same internal name because we already have a JavaScript or Angular service that's wired up to pull out the source URL for this publishing image. Now, for this particular list, I did go with a content type only because in the event we wanted to reuse this across the site, where we would have postings maybe for a particular department and they all do not live in a single list. We have that flexibility because now this is a content type and that schema will carry over and be consistent. But this particular list actually has a fair amount of items, and we know that there is a lot of misunderstanding of how many items you actually can keep in a list. So as we look at this video or recording this video, we have 20,000 items, but this guy is actually loading in the background with sample data. And as I hit refresh, you will see that this will grow from 20,360. If I hit refresh again, now we got 20,373. So this guy is growing, and it's actually scheduled or on track to grow to 100,000 items. And from this 100,000 items, I wanted for a lot of reasons why I wanted this many items in the list. One is to show that we can make RestAPI and Angular calls against a very large list, and the things that you have to do in order to accommodate that, but also to kind of help break down some of the barriers or the misnomers that lists are limited to 5,000 items. And that comes from looking at if you go into list settings where you're actually modifying the schema of the list or the properties, a lot of folks get freaked out when they see this threshold warning here, which is just a warning that says, hey, this is over 5,000. Be careful of how you create views and your sorting and even your API calls against this list, because it's a very large list. And in this video, I'm not going to go into too much detail on how this is set up, but there is a couple of things I will point out. That index columns is the key element or the key feature that you have to enable in order to deal with a list of this size. You have to pretty much create an index on any column that you plan to do filterings or sorting or manipulating the data by that field. And when you go to create an index, not all of the fields are going to be available. So for example, you cannot do an index against a multi-line field or a single line text field because you just can't filter by that. I mean, who's going to think of all the characters in that particular field and match on that? Usually that's a search item. So, but things like dates and yes/no columns and choice columns and things along those lines, those are available for you to apply your index. And we will see, once we start getting into the REST API calls, we will see which fields we will sort on. And so far I've identified these. This is actually a little bit more than what we need, but everything that we need is here. If not, we're going to go and create it. So that's just one thing to be aware of. So we'll keep an eye on that count. So we have our featured list, our job posting list that's going to power a lot of different features on the site, mainly because the entire site is centered around this list. Everything else is just a accommodation of this. But if we look at these particular items, you will see I have a lot of sample data, and I will create another video on how do you get sample data inside of a SharePoint list. And you will see that I have a console job that's running in the background. We'll actually walk through on how to build this console job, only because I think working with very large lists, the issue with SharePoint and very large lists is that most architects or developers will come in, and really consulting firms will come in and design a solution. And it's not until over time, when a lot of those lists and libraries are used in that solution and get heavily populated with data, that you really start to realize performance issues or maintenance issues or things along those lines. So we want to catch that much earlier in the process. So I think it's very important to, when you're building a system, that you do a pressure test, which actually, a list on the upper limits or towards the upper limits or beyond the upper limits of what you expect, and make sure that your development accounts for that. And you only can do that with sample data, right? I don't have a team of folks in the room next door that's actually populating this list. There is, the job, as you've seen, is doing all the work. So here we have sample data for the title. If the job is active or inactive, you actually have the date, the summary, the department for the job, the salary range, location, experience, the description. Again, all of this is all sample data. There's actually a very cool tool that will allow you to get a lot of different random pieces of content, which is important, especially with responsive design, as we discussed a couple of videos ago. That is important to get a nice variation to make sure that your UI can account for all the different scenarios that may be thrown at you. Now, here is the actual photo for the job for the job posting, and we'll walk through how we want to leverage that. Because if you look at the design package, there's a photo here on the left-hand side, and then also when we look at where we display the featured jobs, there's also a photo here. So we actually wanted photos as part of our random data. And again, in a future video, I'll show you exactly how to set that up. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. What we want to do, we have our carousel, and right below our carousel, we want to drop in our featured job. So let's pop over to our project. And in our project, we have the featured. This is our design. Where are we? This is our design. I think we already have a template. Yes, so in our style library, we already have a jobs feature template. So let's go ahead and wire this guy. If we go to the services layer, and this is where we're going to go ahead and pull in our data. And basically, if I collapse all of this, we're just going to start with, let's put a comma here because we want to add a method towards the end. And I'm going to just copy get slides because I think it has all the key pieces that I need. So here's our REST call. We assume that this list is going to live at the root web or the site collection level. And then this is our chunk of data that's needed to pull in for each publishing image for each item. it goes against that site column and extract the source URL. Okay, so let's give this a unique name. We just call it get featured jobs. And right now, I mean, this is a large list, so we have to be very careful on how much data that we bring back. But I believe by default, even if we do not specify a count or a top or the max, it's what it's going to do. It's going to bring back, I think it maxed out at 100. So let's give that a try. Obviously, I'm not going to get all 100,000 items that will eventually be in this list. So the name of our list is JP, is it JP job postings? Let me double check here. So the name of our list is, I believe it's job postings. So job postings, so I can just do a direct copy from this. I don't know why I have problems copying. Here we go. All right, so this is just going to be a direct copy from here. Let's pop back into our project. Just paste that here. Ordered by JP publish date. So this is the job posting date. So again, you know, I can come in here and confirm each one of these internal names for these site columns by simply clicking on the site column name. So job post date, JP post date. Okay, so we're good there. And then it's going to bring back the items, and we're going to order by post date in descending order. So we're going to get the first 100 recent postings. Now this guy is wired up to do our JP image, and because we are reusing the publishing image, this should just simply work JP image. So we should be wired up there, and that's going to pull in the source URL, and basically that's it, right? We still have to go and add some logic to identify these as featured postings and specify a count. So, but for right now, let's go ahead and leave this as is. I'm going to save this all. Let's just jump over here to our components. And we have our job categories component. You know, these are all the components we have so far. I like things to be nice and uniform, nice and neat, so it's easy to identify things. And I'm going to just copy this guy. And I think this is going to give me everything that we need initially. So if you copy this, just rename this to jobs featured. It's kind of an odd way to say that, but we like to prefix things that are related. I should have probably named this jobs categories, but jobs featured. And this needs to point to our featured template, which is jobs featured HTML. And our get needs to be our service that we just created. And we're not passing an account for now, so let's go ahead and leave that empty. And let's just go ahead and do, you want to do J or P? Okay, P. So we do P, just our internal variable name. And let's see what else. And we have the title, so that can be an attribute for our tag, and the count, which can be an attribute for our tag. And we will leverage both of those. Okay, everything else is fine. So just going to hit save here. And now let's go inside of our template. Oops, jobs feature. And basically the way this is broken down, this guy, so this div here is the one that will be repeated, and this has our title. So actually let's get a little bit more control over that. So what I'm gonna do, if you remember in the video where we actually constructed our component, we went through each one of these sections and their roles and responsibilities. This binding section, just to recap, this binding section is going to bring in the attributes needed. And we allow the content manager to pass in a title attribute on their custom tag. And we can use that title attribute in the template to give it a name, very similar to what we're doing for job categories. So let's go to, let's just copy this guy. Let's just copy the token. And the way that this works is whatever that binding's name is, it becomes a local variable on the controller, which we represent with the alias VM. This is all recap stuff. So this is stuff we already talked about. So it becomes a local variable on the controller. So we use the alias, and we just dot in that binding name. So for the rest of these guys, let's just go ahead and comment this out. And let's expand this div, and because this is the div that gets repeated, this is where we do our ng repeat. And because we use the same variable names every time we're dealing with collections, vm.items becomes our standard. Okay, so just to ensure that this is working, let's just do something very simple. We know that every list is going to have a title field, and so let's just display the title, and then we'll come in and drop in all the other elements. Save this off. I think everything else is saved, and we want to push up our template, push up our component, push up our services, and publish. Okay, so I have a working instance of Window Explorer, so that's working. And if I go here to our site, hit refresh, and nothing's going to happen. And the reason why nothing is happening is because we did not call the HTML token, right? So let's go into edit this page, drop in our script editor web part. We should not have the restriction that we had with the slider where we had to embed that in the page layout. We should be able to go back to our standard model of using the script editor web part and then dropping in the HTML tag there. So let's go down to edit snippet. This is our first guy, right? And based on the controller name, let me just double check this. So based on our controller name, this is going to dictate our tag name. All right, so let's get rid of all the caps with the hyphens. This is just Angular syntax. And we do not have the joy of having Visual Studio to complete the tags for us, so we have to do everything manually. Okay, so JP jobs here, and then if we insert this, we'll come back and add in the attributes. Hit publish. And the expectation is that we should be able to see featured jobs. And we have them, all 20 million. I think it caps out of 100. Yep, so now we go into our, what's this? Our job categories, right? Okay, so this looks good. Let's go ahead and inspect the JSON that we received back from the list. So let's hit, do I really always have to pop out? Oh, this is going to be a pain. Okay, so let's pop out here. And what you want to do is when you're in your dev console, just make sure you're filtering by XR. That will help you. And now what you can do, this filter search box, you can use this to search by all elements. So what we want to do is just prefix with job posting, so that's the name of our list. And if we click on it, if you highlight this guy, you will see the RestAPI endpoint URL. That's what we specify in our services. And it actually shows you the data that's returned. And I want to say, yep, so we're confirming that if you do not specify a top, you bring back 100 items. And if you do not filter on columns, you get everything, including the metadata and all this other good stuff. So this is going to be pretty heavy for what we need. We actually want this to be, we only displaying a handful of this data. And this time, let's hit refresh again. Again, this is just showing you how we can come back, filter on where we can make REST API calls against a very large list. And this call is costing us 1.3 seconds, which is actually for a REST call a lifetime. We like to keep these under 200 milliseconds. So let me clear this filter. Let's see what's the time for some of our other REST API calls. Wow, this is horrible. 6-7 seconds. Is this the load time? This doesn't seem right? Why would all these take so much time to load? Wow, these times are horrible. Okay, I may have to look into why these are taking. Maybe it's the server. Oh, it's probably the server's being taxed because we have this console job running, and this is a dev server. I mean, this is obviously it's not going to be production quality. Okay, so I'll leave this for now. I'm not going to investigate this too much, only because I know we have a job running in the background. But that's interesting. I mean, these calls are, especially for the template. That's oh no, this is for the image. This is for the image. Okay, anyway, so I'm off track, sorry. Yeah, so we can make REST API calls against a very large list, and this, by out of the box, that's the cool thing about it, out of the box, this thing is going to be tuned to work against out of the SharePoint list. But a couple of things that we do need to take a closer look at is if we go into our services layer where we're manipulating our REST API call, anything that we do an order by on, any column that we do an order by on or a filter, we want to make sure that that column is being indexed within very large lists. So so we already have JP publishing date indexed, so that's a good thing. So just keep that in mind. I think that's one of the key elements, especially with, even when you're doing CSOM calls, no one on this video is still doing full trusted code, right? Unless we absolutely have to. I know those are edge cases, but now we're all graduated to using CSOM and out of the box REST API or Json or something more modern techniques with developing and with SharePoint. So, but even if you're doing CSOM or full trust code, you have to ensure that any column that you're filtering on in camel queries or or things along those lines are being indexed. Okay. All right. So let's clean this up a little bit. So what we want to do, we do want to specify a top, so a max count. So let's go ahead and do that here. And let's borrow our logic that we use for max count. Who's using max count? Okay, blog posts. So let's just borrow this. And basically this says if 1 is not specified, we would default it to 8. In our scenario, we're going to default it to 4. Let's just move this guy up as a passed in parameter that they can pass in. And we also want to ensure that this is the value that we max out on. Okay. And that's another thing. Once we get into server-side coding, with CSOM and things along those lines, the limit, even CSOM, I believe, maxes out at 1,000 by default or 2,000 by default or something along those lines. But, if you have to, for whatever reason, iterate through more than that, there's a paging mechanism that you need to use. That's another technique that you have to be aware of when dealing with very large lists. So we want to filter the publish date, and then also we only want to bring back those job postings. I'm sorry, we want to max on the count. We want to order by the publish date, and we only want to bring back those postings that are active. So let's go ahead and put in our active filter, and we do that by simply doing the filter notation. Again, this odata is everything. If you know odata and you're comfortable with this syntax, you can do a very lot with very little, right? So let's filter on, what is that internal name again? So we want to filter on the active flag. So is active, JP is active, okay? And we just come in here, is active, and this is, again, notation equal to true. Right. All right. So let's go ahead and push this up. And we come over to our list, hit refresh on the home page. And we get goose egg. What's going on here? So let's take a look. And this is good. I mean, this is how you troubleshoot, right? So you just go to inspect. The first thing you want to look for, if there's any errors in the console. Let me just slide this over because I need to be able to toggle between these two windows quickly. right, so let me just slide this. I'm trying to squeeze everything into the viewport. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is look at the console and make sure there are no errors there. So this is pretty clean. I mean, we get a 4.4 for this image, but we understand why that is, right? Because by default, none of the images in the design package are going to match up. So the next thing you want to do is take a look at what is actually being returned. And every time I flip those tabs, I personally just hit refresh just to make sure I'm looking at the latest and greatest. So now we want to look at our call. So I want to filter by job. Start typing the word job postings. And this is going to get me right now to our REST API call. And now I'm getting 0 results. And because we are accustomed to making the change testing, especially with JavaScript, right? Because you don't have compile time that's going to give you compile errors and all this other good stuff. So I always seem to double check myself as I'm making these micro changes and then pushing them up. So the micro change that we made was all we done was add in the filter as well as the top. So let's remove the filter and see if it's the filter or the top that's killing us, because it should be a syntax error or in this case maybe a logic error, because if it was syntax we would have seen an error in the console. So let's publish this up and hit refresh, and let's see what we receive now. Okay, so we received 4 items. Why did we get 4? I was expecting 8. All right, so let's look at our, this is odd. Why would we only receive 4? All right, so let's look at this guy. Yeah, so this is 4. Oh, because our max count is 4. Sorry, I'm not following along. I'm not following along in my own video. Okay, that's why we receive 4. All right, so it's not our top. So our top is working as expected. Did this? I'm just curious. Did this come back faster? Let's see. Let's hit refresh. Last time we were like 1 point something seconds for. Yeah, so we're still high. Okay, so I'll just chop this up as the server been busy, and we have a under spec server. All right. That concerns me. I don't know. I want to be much faster than that. You know, ideally you want these solutions to be right around a 1-2 second for page load total, right? All right. So the issue is with our filter, right? And what we want to do, let's paste this, let's get this guy back in here. We want to filter on, let's put it here. We want to filter on the active flag. And I think let's just paste here. JP is active. Okay, I got too much going on. All right. Equals true. All right, so I'm going to save you the pain. I ran into this issue while I put this together, but I wanted to show this error. This is a JP is active. It's a yes no column, right? So if we go here, look at the schema. Yeah, it's active. That's a yes no column. So by default, and here's the confusing thing. I actually had to do a Google search on this. So by default, when you look at this guy, SharePoint actually returns, if you look at the yes, JP is active, yeah, true, it returns a true. But to filter on it, I guess on the server, it filters, the value is actually 1 and 0. So if you're used to developing against yes no column, I think we all know this. I think we all are aware of, you know, the yes no flag is it's a 0-1 value. So when we do our filter, and that's the cool thing about this REST API OData, everything is done on the server, manipulated, and then sent to the client via Json. So that way, you know, you're not bringing back all of that data. And we've seen this, right? We've seen how in this call, in this result set, how the numbers fluctuate. So this filtering by, you know, only bring back the top 4 results is done by the server, which is keeping things lean and mean. as well as the is active. So any manipulations with the filter or queries or things like that that we may construct within the REST API using the OData notation, that's all done on the server side. So when it comes to the is active, because this value is still on the server side, this is a 1 or a 0. 1 is yes, 0 is no. So that's what we need to do to manipulate it here. And it becomes confusing, right? Because you look at the value and sometimes that's all you have. So it took me a Google search to figure this out. But if we come up here and do equals 1, so JP is active equals 1, that should return me only the active jobs, right? So let's go ahead and push this out. And we come here, hit refresh. And we should get the 4. Now, if I look at this list, let's back up and look at the actual data. And is active, do we have any no's? So we only have yeses here. Okay. Oh, maybe I should make this random as well. All right, so let's do this. Let's go ahead and create some no's. And again, as you can see, I'm just interacting with this list in a standard way, right? It's a very large list, but because I have my indexes in place, there is still is performing well. And just to, it's one thing I do want to point out. How many items we have in here? So just to help knock on that 5,000 max item, I looked it up, and for SharePoint 2013, and I think for each version of SharePoint this may increase, a SharePoint list can support up to 30 million items, right? So that's the supported limit. I'm not sure if that's a system physical limit or what have you, but 30 million items. So if you're doing more than 30 million in the list, I think that's, you probably want to reconsider a different data source. But 30 million is the upper limit, and like I said before, we have a console job that's going to be pumping in 100,000. So this thing is still cranking. So now that we have our is active a no flag in there, what we want to do just to confirm, because with 1 we can't really tell if this filter is working or not, we just know we don't get an error. But if we do a reverse test and change this to 0, this is now going to be set up to bring back the top 4 inactive jobs. All right, so let's do this and hit refresh. And those should be my 3. So dental hygienist, yep, cost accountant, and graphic designer. Okay, so our filter seems to be working as expected. All right, so let's switch this back to a 1. And so our feature, this is what we're missing. We don't have a feature column. So now we have 100,000 items, but no feature column. All right, let's go ahead and create that. And again, I just want to walk through the maintenance of this, right? Because no solution is going to be 100% coming out the gate. So there's definitely going to be some area to where columns need to be added, additional functionality need to be added. So we need to adjust our schema. And even with 100,000 item lists, right, or 30 million, 10 million item lists, we should still be able to update and manipulate the schema. So what we want to do, let's add a feature flag. And what I'm going to do is go to the site collection level. Let's filter by job portal and see if there's anything that we can reuse. So we have a active, we have a show. I'm tempting to use show, but that may be a little misleading. I probably should have used show for active. I probably didn't do a really good job with inventorying what was out here before I went out and created columns. And that's the thing, like I would advise to try to reuse as many columns as possible. First, group your columns into your solution. So all these are job portal, right? Especially if you're sharing many solutions within the same site collection. So try to group those, but try not to create a new column for every instance, right? You see I'm going very generic here with my category, so this gives me 3 choice slots to drop content into, and then in the display name I can make it relevant for that particular list. All right, so let's do a feature. Yeah, that's my fault. So I actually should have inventory this a little bit better. So is featured. Let's go ahead and drop that in our custom group, and this should be no. Let's default it to no, or else everything would be featured and it'd be hard to highlight because you only get 4 slots, right? So it'll be hard to highlight which ones are featured. So we want to default this to no. And then what we'll do is just go to our content type and then just add that field. All right, so just add from existing and featured here. And you notice that you got a filtered list because if you're using it, it's not an option. So is featured, and then you have this order. But let's do the ordering in the list itself. So let's go back to our posting list. Let's take a look at this guy. Yeah, so is featured. Make it user friendly. Right, and all these changes are in the list itself. So though it's it's a shared site column, right? We're making it relevant to this list itself. So it becomes that available. So is featured, it becomes relevant to that list only. So let's just copy this. Now go to our services layer, add in the missing column. So it has to be active and it has to be featured. All right, so let's push this up, and we're expecting 0 results because we have a new column. We defaulted to no, so everyone's going to be no initially. Hit refresh, and that's expected. And now let's go to our data and let's randomly select some as featured. All right, so we added the new column, but we don't get that by default in our default view. So let's bring that in. And I kind of like to bring these guys in only because now I can use edit mode within the list to easily manipulate these. So, okay, let's randomly select some items. Now we add this new column and we're going to filter on this column, and we're dealing with a very large list. So what's the next step we should do? All right, start thinking about that. So okay, so we manipulate our data. Let's go back and hit yes. And those are our featured items. All right, so let's go ahead to confirm this. We can do one of two things. We can create a view, right, that shows all featured jobs. And you can use that to do a litmus test against what you're actually bringing back using the REST API. Or you can just create the filter right here. But if it's something that's going to be reused, I recommend doing something like that. So is active, we have these 4. So now let's do the other test. Let's turn inactive to no. And then come back, hit refresh. And now we were receiving 3, right? And that's expected. And so for our top check, let's turn off this filter. So let's clear that, get everything. Let's add in a little bit more featured jobs. And then come here, hit refresh. All right, so now we have more featured jobs, but because of our top count, we're maxing out at 4. Okay. All right, so back to my question. So we added a new column on a very large list, and we're filtering on that new column. What should we do? You have to say it loud so I can hear you. You're right. So we have to, you see, you didn't realize that YouTube videos work like that, did you? Yeah, it's two-way now. So so you're right. So we have to add this as a index column, right? So we go to index columns and create a new index and select our guy is featured and then hit create. So now this is going to be optimized and bring back data as expected because now it's a featured guy. Now the cool thing about it is, like, I think 2016 latest update as well as SharePoint Online, you don't have to worry about this anymore. So what's going to happen is that they actually put in the logic, Microsoft put in the logic that for very large lists, if very I think by these different types that allow you to create indexes, they automatically create those for you. Now, how they get over the max, I have no idea. And that's why, you know, eventually you want to be selective. Right now, we're a little bit under half of what the limit is. So the max is 20. So, you know, we're at 8. And we probably add like 4 or 5 more columns, you know, maybe different scenarios that we run into. But again, this is one of those things that you want to monitor and see that if you don't need it, don't create it, and maybe just create it as the need arises. But you have to remember to do it in 2013 because it's not automated as it is in SharePoint Online. Okay. All right. So that's that. I think we're feeling good about our logic, right? So we have our feature where we have the top. And we have the top feature, which is important because we're sorting by the publish date. Now let's really quickly, oh, this is odd. Why we have ovals for our buttons instead of nice round icons. All right, so we'll figure that out. So now what we want to do, let's go ahead and plug in our publishing image. And I think this is the sweetest part. I mean, I really like this because one, we're using image renditions, which a lot of folks don't know. I promise you 95% of the SharePoint developers are just not leveraging that. But I think with responsive design, you start to seek out what can we do to make this work correctly or to get these images looking nice in all these different scenarios. So what all we have to do is ng source, bring in our item. And again, in our services layer, we just call this image URL. Save that, push it up. And then we come and take a look. Oh, we have a lot of things we have to plug in. All right, so here's our images. Again, they're all over the place, right? Because we don't have our rendition ID in there. So let's really quickly create one within the right aspect ratio. So I have to look at the design package, look at the template. 270 by 204 is what we need. So let's go ahead and create that guy. 270 by 204. And ID is 9. So we go back into our template. Add in our trusty keyword, rendition ID. And push this out. And I have some very heavy images in there. So yeah, so let's go back to this guy. Now everything is uniform and looking nice. Okay, so let's go ahead and drop in our, oh, that's another guy we don't have. We don't have our position type, if it's full-time, part-time, or seasonal. That's one column we missed, or I missed. So that's something that we probably, again, have to adjust the schema and add it in. But that's going to be a bigger problem, only because I want to see this with random data. And another reason why I have so much data is because I want to really test out this search box. And I think there's a lot of different scenarios like paging and all this other good stuff. So it makes sense to have a bunch of data. And when you start having to manipulate or look through everything, it's important to make sure that you're dealing with a heavy deck. So let's go ahead and add in our location and then our summary. and then we'll just go ahead and wrap up this video because we're getting way beyond where we need to be. So let's go in. So full-time, we don't have a guide for this yet, so let's leave this open. Let's just put to do, so that'll be everywhere. This is just our location, and let's just look at our schema. Here's another way that you can get column names. By looking at the result set of your JSON. So what are we looking for? Location, JP location. Again, token notation item dot JP location. What else do we have? Oh, this is summary. Token notation item dot summary there. The buttons we'll worry about later. And yeah, this is a miss, so we have to circle back and do that at a feature video. All right, so that's published out. Just go here, hit refresh. And we're running to the same issue that we had before, where things are just misaligned because the designer did not account for the different types. Okay, that to do is kind of screwing things up here, right? Oh, that would be cool. I just saw this. So we can click on this and actually get a map. That'll be cool. Yeah, that'll be fun to implement. All right, so what do we want to tackle? Should we spend time doing this? Well, let's just do it in the browser. I think we all are on the same page on how to do this. So looks like this matters. This paragraph tag here in the feature is does not have any boundaries, right? So we need to do a max height. Let's just say 40. And then you want to do a min height of the same number. Right, and that's just going to keep things in the pocket, except for this guy. Oh, this is wrapping because of this. All right, so I should drop that to do. Okay, so let me grab this real quick. So product box, p tag matter. Oh, come on, man. I promise you there should be an easier way to copy this. Hold on, what's this? No, it's more styling. All right, let's copy this. And as we discussed in our previous video, what we want to do, everything is in our SP overrides CSS file. And let's just create a section here for feature. So that's product box matter, and only keep what we need, right? And push this up. Again, this publish is going to do my save and all this other good stuff. So we're okay to push this up. Hit refresh. And okay, I think we're truncating where we need to truncate. Yes, so we have this extra white space because those are not 3 lines, so I think we're good there. Let me remove this to do. This is starting to irritate me just a little bit. Let's go back to our template. Let's just make this full, and then once I get everything in there, we should be okay. Push this up. Okay, how are we looking? We're looking great. All right, so this is more uniform. Oh yeah, and then we have this guy here. I know exactly what this is, so let's go to inspect. Or you're going to run into this a lot. So this is the design package battling with the SharePoint theme, which is our Oslo. So there is a global right here in Oslo. This is our theme CSS. There's a global definition for buttons. This guy. No. This guy. No. there is a global definition for buttons to where it specifies the min width. Uh-oh, it's time to go. Yeah, this min width here in Oslo, if you uncheck this and hover over, our buttons become nice and round. So what I need to do is to define the min width for these buttons as let's get rid of this filter. I might have to create a class because I don't have anything to really hang this on. So let's use the product box class as our bounding container, and our button. See, I don't know if I need to do input type or just the button. Let's do both. All right. So let's go over here to our. This is not as straightforward. So you kind of have to know a little bit about CSS in order to make this work. So we only want to affect buttons. Again, we don't want to make the problem worse, right, by defining something overriding the theme, because the theme has that for a reason, maybe because of the ribbon or something like that, and the designer doesn't care, so they want that to be inherent. So we want to be very strategic about how we scope these changes. So we want to wrap everything within the product box, and we only want the button. So let's prefix all this here. The reset and the submit, not so much. I think this is our guy. So what we want to do, min width, and again, just use inherit to go with its natural value. And let's push this up. This is overrides, right? Yeah, let's push this up. And hit refresh. No, still. Ooh. Well, that stinks. Class product box. Did I do all that right? Oh, no matters, right? Let's just do product box. Yeah, I was scoping it too much, I think. All right, let's see what happens. Hit refresh. There we go. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so everything's everything. All right, so let's do our responsive design check. Oh, we got some work to do there, but we're not going to do that now. We probably want to go a little bit larger with our image too. Remember that aspect ratio? Aspect ratio is the key. You don't want these grainy at this level. So you have to find a balance of how much larger you want to make that image rendition parameter. The cool thing is that you can use that for the same ID, right? You don't have to create a new ID. You know, I think we need to get a little bit more tighter on our max height and width at different steps, right? And we already talked about that in the different media queries and things like that. So I'll leave that up to you as a solution to do. Why are we missing this? Oh, we didn't specify. Okay. Let's do one last thing and we're going to wrap up. I know that this is running way over. So let's do one last trick. What we want to do is give the content manager a little bit more control over what how this displays, right? So we want to give them a title, and we just call this title attribute featured. Let's call this hot jobs, and this should kick in right away because that's wired up. But our count binding attribute is not wired up. So right now, let's we're going to specify 8 here. But that gives them more control over how many to bring back, and we don't have to hard code that in our services. You know, just treating them like web part properties. All right, so hot job, so that kicked in, but this still displaying 4. So let's quickly wire this up. Let's go to our component, This is our count attribute here. All we have to do is pass it in as a parameter to our service. And this uses the control prefix, right? Because this, when you're here, code behind, right? If you take that thought process from C#, our web controls, our components, our .NET components. So, and this is the code behind, and here you reference the controller by controller, but in the view, you create an alias and we reference it by VM. So if it's VM dot or controller dot, depending on where you are, it's actually referencing the same variable, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind. Okay, so that's that. And I think we're already wired up because our services is expecting that, and if we don't provide it, it defaults it to 4 or whatever. So let's push this up, and let's hit refresh. And there we go. So we're expecting 8, right? But we have other conditions that have to be met, like is it featured and is it active and all this other good stuff. So we may not have 8 that's matching that condition. Again, if you create a SharePoint view with what you're looking for as far as feature, you can quickly bounce over to that view and quickly validate or confirm if that's what, if everything is working as expected. So let's just turn featured on to yes. How many we have? We have, and then this have to be active, have to be yes. So that's our 6. So that's what we have, 6. All right. So everything's looking good. So again, let's see where our count is. This thing should still be growing. We're up to 26,292, and if I hit refresh, still growing, right? So yeah, so that's how you make REST API calls against a very large list. Again, by the time you get to the next video, this should be up to 100,000. I will shoot a video on how we put this, how do you pump in, and really what this is doing is just being pumped in from a JSON file into a SharePoint list. And this is the mapping of how we manipulate that. So we'll talk about, how do we get publishing images in there, and how do we create all that test data, and I think that may be a couple of series. So I may do a mini series within this season of videos, just because I think this part right here is important, because we get into CSOM, REST API calls, best practices, how-tos, and all this other good stuff. But I think once we figure this piece out, that would be great. But the way that this is running, and if we look at the console, this is running actually pretty slow. So another thing what we want to do, we'll look at 2 different other strategies when dealing with large data and CSOM. One, how can we do this in batches? Because each time you see a new line pop up, that's actually a web request, right, or a service request from my laptop to the SharePoint server. Again, that's the benefit of CSOM. You can run this anywhere, right? So I'm running this on a laptop that doesn't have SharePoint installed. And we talked about this in our environment video, but this is very slow. So one, can we make batch calls, right? So, we'll take a look at that. And another one would be, how can we make this asynchronous or multi-threaded to where we're actually not doing single thread, but we're actually maximize the number of thread counts and try to get that 100,000 in there a lot quicker. So I'll do that in a future video. Maybe that's the next video. I'm not sure, but we'll see how that works. In the meantime, take care. I'll check you out in the next video. Take care.